Good morning. This is Tech Talk Today, episode 16 for June 26th, 2014. My name is Chris, and this is sort of the Google Hangover episode, I guess you could say. We're going to try to catch up with a few things that broke during all of the Google I.O. 2014 hoopla. And then, towards the end of the episode, when we get to your feedback, we'll circle back and cover some of our day after thoughts of Google I.O. 2014. Kind of a big week for Google, so there's lots to talk about. And of course, I'm joined by my esteemed group of morning internet pundits in the Mumble Room. Good morning, Mumble Room. Are you guys ready to start with our first story this week? And Popey, I apologize ahead of time. It is very US-centric, but I think it's an important one, and it's one that we would have talked about yesterday had Google I.O. not been going on. And this is, it's something for cell phone users when they get stopped by police. No, I don't have that one. Dang it. Here, I'll I just remembered that. This Supreme Court policy is pretty good. This decision brings the Fourth Amendment into the digital age is how people are spinning this. The core of the decision is that digital information is different. It triggers privacy concerns far more profound than ordinary physical objects. That's the key takeaway here. In general, warrants are required for searches, but the court's precedents have said that a person's privacy expectations diminish considerably after an arrest. Police may protect themselves and others by searching the arrestee for weapons or securing evidence that might be destroyed. So using that particular rationale, police have been able to search people's cell phones because they could say, well, we don't want them to destroy evidence, or it could give us more information about an imminent plot or something like that. So when you get arrested, they've been downloading all of the contents from your phone. Text messages, pictures, contacts, emails, everything. They have tools that do this for Android and iOS and BlackBerry. So Chief Justice Roberts said that he cannot deny that the decision now that police will not be able to do these searches will have an impact on the ability of law enforcement to combat crime. However, he wrote that privacy simply comes at a cost. He said that police can use their own technologies to ensure that the information on cell phones that might contain critical evidence is not erased or lost. And he said there could also be case-specific exemptions to the new warrant ruling, as in some cases, they might let you search anyways. I think this is a pretty big deal. Were you guys aware, at least those of you who are in the U.S. in the Mumble Room, were you aware that if you were arrested by the police, it was legal for them to download all of the contents of your cell phone and go through it? Did you know that?
I think I was aware of that, just because I've been keeping up on this kind of thing, and does surprise me that the Supreme Court went this way. Instead of using the whole probable cause clause, they went with this is a right that the people have, which is kind of surprised me.
Yeah, here's a little clip about the story.
So police most of the time are going to have to get a search warrant before they can just go ahead and search a person's mobile phone when they're making an arrest. And think about the implications here, Corey. The trove of data. We're not just talking about correspondence, so email and text, but also medical records, photos with times and dates, social media updates, browsing histories that police can get from these smartphones. Chief Justice Roberts writing that decision, he deemed that the sensitive data on phones make it an unreasonable search banned under the Fourth Amendment. Here's one of the things that he had to say in the opinion. He states, quote, a decade ago, officers might have occasionally stumbled across a highly personal item, such as a diary. But today, more than 90% of American adults who own cell phones keep on their person a digital record of nearly every aspect of their lives. So, Corey, this was a surprisingly broad decision here, again, in a unanimous decision. A lot of lower courts had different opinions on this, saying that police can look through a phone just as they can look through other things that they find on a person at the time of an arrest. But again, nearly complete agreement from the justices that cell phone data should be treated differently.
I noticed the chat room says, who keeps medical information on their cell phone? I think Apple and Google and Microsoft would very, 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 very much like you to do that.
Oh, yeah.
So even if you're not doing it right now, they would like you to do that very soon. So I think this is a great thing. In fact, I think it's surprisingly good. I think one of the reasons why I'm kind of like, oh, geez, I'm not quite sure what to say is because it seems too good to be true. Usually something like this comes with a catch.
But the question is, can they seize the phone until they get the warrant?
Oh, and then just hold on to it and then get a rubber stamp warrant and then just download it anyways if they really want it.
Exactly.
Yeah, maybe. And they also said the police can use their own technologies to ensure their security. I don't know exactly what that means. That seems a little odd. All right, okay.
Yeah, it does seem like there's a way to get through past that.
Let's make up. Let's do a make good here for our non-U.S. Listeners. Let's talk about Bitcoin. What? Oh, geez, I know Bitcoin. Well, here's why. Tomorrow is the beginning of the Fed's big sale of their Silk Road Bitcoins. They're going to they're auctioning off in total. Now, not starting tomorrow. In total, though, $17.4 million worth of Bitcoins. So, Second Market CEO and founder sat down at Bloomberg to discuss the sale because there's some interesting details on how they're actually going to auction off these coins.
All right, so walk us through what's actually going to happen. I mean, so the feds are auctioning off Bitcoin, which, by the way, in and of itself is a pretty big deal because it's a little bit of a stamp of approval, if you would.
Right.
And how are you guys going to participate?
Right.
A lot of a stamp of approval, right?
If it was cocaine, exactly, they'd throw it away, but they view it as money. Yeah, so what's happening on Friday is they're doing an auction where basically anybody who can put down a $200,000 deposit can bid in this auction on blocks of Bitcoin, 3,000 Bitcoin blocks, which is worth about $1.5 million. And so what we're doing is we're actually creating a syndicate. So we're putting together all the bids that we get from our customers and then putting it into the auction so people can bid at lower dollar amounts.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird how the U.S. Marshals have done this. So they have a lot more Bitcoin. This is just the first block.
Because it's, what, $17.5 million total?
Yeah, but they have over $100 million worth of Bitcoin. So, but it's interesting. They're auctioning it off in blocks of 3,000. Smart, because they don't want one person to get all of it and be able to move the market so easily. On the other hand, who can afford to buy 3,000 Bitcoin at once? I mean, there are very few people who can go out and drop $1.5 million.
Well, this is kind of why it's good to have a syndicate model, right? I mean, so you can bring in a number of people.
Right, and plus you have to have a U.S. bank account, which eliminates a lot of foreign investors, and most people just
and
don't.
A lot of Bitcoin users.
And Bitcoin users as well, yeah. So we put the syndicate together, and so we're collecting bids up until noon tomorrow, and then we'll just basically take our bids and put them into the auction.
So how little could I put $5 in, or is there a minimum?
Minimum is $25,000.
Oh, minimum is $25,000. Oh, okay. Also, from the Bitcoin section of our show today, Coinbase has announced that they've partnered up with Intuit's QuickBooks to offer Bitcoin payments to small businesses. So folks who are using Intuit's payment processing system, the pay by coin functionality will be added now. It's a new service from Intuit that will enable small businesses to accept Bitcoin payments. Small business operators will register with Coinbase, link their wallet to their QuickBooks online account. When a customer receives an invoice, they now have the option to pay by Bitcoin. Intuit does not currently charge a fee for this new service either. Coinbase does not charge any fees for the first 1 million USD in Bitcoin transactions. After that, it's a 1% processing fee, which is charged when converting Bitcoin back to USD. So they take the 1% out of the revenue of converting the Bitcoin to US dollars. That's interesting.
Hold on, you can pay for Bitcoin with Bitcoin?
No, what they're saying is that when they're converting the Bitcoin to dollars, during that conversion they'll take a 1% profit there. You see what I'm saying? So that's where Coinbase takes their transaction fee to enable this payment system, but that's not even until after $1 million has been processed.
Okay, I thought we were having Bitcoinception or something like that.
Well, you could always use Bitcoin to buy Dogecoin, to buy Litecoin, and then that would be a little cryptocurrency inception. And then one last story that fell through the cracks yesterday. You guys are probably familiar with Aereo. Again, this is a little U.S.-centric, but one more clip, and then we're done with the clips for today.
The Supreme Court is effectively grounding the internet-based network television service Aereo in a ruling with big ramifications for the media industry, particularly its new class of streaming and cloud-based companies. For $8 a month, Aereo lets subscribers stream live network programming and record shows for playback on any device with internet access. The big networks and cable companies took Aereo to court for not paying broadcast transmission fees. Aereo argued it shouldn't have to because it was basically working like an antenna in the cloud.
Nobody says you can't have an antenna. Nobody says you can't have a DVR. So it's all about, can you have a DVR and an antenna that you control just remotely?
In a 6-3 ruling, the justices said you can't if you don't pay those fees. In the majority opinion, Justice Stephen Breyer wrote, Aereo's system is, for all practical purposes, identical to a cable system. Both use their own equipment, both receive broadcast television programs, many of which are copyrighted. Both enable subscribers to watch those programs virtually as they are being broadcast.
So this is sort of a death nail for Aereo. Aereo had a pretty cool system where they would lease you the antenna, then use a cloud DVR to record the stuff for you. Supreme Court says, you know what? Violates copyright. Violates the broadcaster's copyright. Get it out of here. And Aereo says they're going to fight. It's just one of those things that is a little unfortunate because essentially what Aereo wanted to do was distribute TV over IP. And the way they were doing it was a little clunky because they were taking broadcasts and then digitizing it again and then transmitting it over IP again. I mean, it would make more sense just to take the middleman out, but I doubt the networks are going to set up CDNs and live stream to everybody right away. It just feels like we are the way we consume media. Two things about it. Number one, it dominates the conversation way more than it should. We need to stop giving such a crap about Netflix. We need to stop giving such a crap about how we're going to get the latest Game of Thrones episode. I know, it's inconceivable to think about it, but for God's sakes, people, we're willing to flush down net neutrality. We're so happy we're going to get our free media music streaming. We'll do anything to make sure our Netflix doesn't get interrupted, and God forbid we don't get Aereo.
It's funny, Chris. This reminds me of a similar problem that happened in the UK, where the BBC and other public service broadcast and other commercial broadcasters broadcast through like the antennas, and you receive your TV signal through the aerial. But there's some online streaming services that work on a loophole in the law that allow cable companies to rebroadcast those transmissions to areas where a terrestrial signal might not reach.
Oh, okay.
And so they use that law to say that we're just rebroadcasting the signal and also wrapping a bunch of adverts on the webpage to make a bit of money out of it. And they got away with it.
But
so
the key there is
they allow it.
The key there, I guess, would be that they only do it in areas that can't receive the transmission.
No. Well, yeah, the internet, Yeah.
Okay.
It just so happens that you can receive this transmission, but you can also go to the internet and watch the program as well.
Man, I would love if we could get that here. I mean, I really think it would be ideal, but at the same time, it's like if they don't, I guess where I come down, it's like I just don't feel like it's worth the fight. I don't know why that is, but to me, it seems obvious that Aereo was going to get shut down. They're setting up antennas, they're receiving a signal, and then they are providing that service all over the United States. It just to me seemed. I wish they wouldn't get shut down. I wish copyright law couldn't be abused this way, but it seemed kind of obvious from inception when this battle began years ago now.
I agree. It shouldn't be the case. You should be able to, rebroadcast something that's being broadcast if it's free to air.
Right.
If the stuff that they're rebroadcasting
and the
is
public
free to
owns
air,
the air,
not encrypted, then I think it's a reasonable thing to do to take that signal and transmit it over a slightly different medium, whether that's a cable connection or the internet in digital form or whatever. So long as you're not, replacing the adverts in between the shows or doing something that compromises the income of the networks that are making the shows, then I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to do.
And it seems like a much better alternative to things like piracy and whatnot for these companies. But I'm not surprised at all that it's been shut down. Hey, Poppy, while we're talking, we got an email in from Jim, and I tell you, this crossed my mind during the keynote yesterday. He says, "Hey, Chris, thanks for covering Google I/O on Tech Talk today. I'm wondering whether the convergence naysayers on the internet will capitulate, given that Google, and I think Apple and MS2 to some extent, have jumped on board with the idea of convergence. In my humble opinion, Shuttleworth called it. Alas, he may have been too early or open about it. Regardless, it seems Google has realized Canonical's convergence plan has merit and has jumped on board." Do you think, did you get wafts of convergence from the keynote yesterday, Popey?
I got wafts of sleep during the keynote. It was just way too long. I zoned out after a while. I'm sure it's super exciting, and some of the design language was a bit over the top. But I agree that a long time ago, everyone said, nobody wants this thing, nobody wants this convergence, and why would I want to do that? And then, other people are coming around and saying, we'll take a look at that as well. Who knows? In a few years' time, it may well be we all look back and say, actually, that was a good idea.
Well, and what I find interesting right now is there is a difference. There is a different approach in strategy right now. You got the canonical approach, which I think eventually will be, ideally one device could be all those things as those devices become more powerful potentially. And you've got the Microsoft thing where it's one UI for all your devices. And then you've got now the Google one, which I think is the most vague. Like they've got back-end synchronization and, cloud messaging synchronization. They've got some integration between Chrome OS and Android, but it's not quite the same level as like Apple's integration with iOS and Apple. Like you can't actually answer the call On Chrome OS, you can just say you're getting a call. It's weird. It's different. It's not all the same.
I wouldn't say the canonical one is one device for everything. I think lots of people interpret convergence differently. Some people think convergence means I have one application and it has to look identical on every form factor, which is not the case. And some people think that convergence means I have one device in my pocket and that's the only device I use. But it's not. It means different things to different people. To the developer, it means I only have to support one code base. For the system administrator, they've got the same code base across multiple machines and they can do security updates across all of them. For the user, it could mean one device, but it could mean multiple devices, and knowing that they've got the same app on multiple different devices, like a full desktop PC that's, Core i7, but also an ARM phone in their pocket, and it's actually the same app and it synchronizes to the cloud. So I wouldn't dismiss ours as only part of the story, but ours isn't finished yet. That's the problem.
And I feel like Google's was rushed. They also demoed a couple of Android apps running on Chrome OS. They didn't talk about how you do that. They didn't say did they move over the Dalvik runtime? Did they port the application directly? Will it be available on other Linuxes? How do other developers do that?
Specific apps. I didn't see
They
that.
just showed Evernote and Flipboard running on Chrome OS, the Android apps running on Chrome OS. But they didn't say how. Right. They didn't say if it'd be available to other developers. But they used it as sort of a, look at us, we're doing convergence now. Now you can take your touch app and you can run it on your mouse and keyboard computer. Yay. And I know the Pixel has a touchscreen, but Pixel's kind of a limited run device. So I thought their convergence story, if you want to call it that, it was the weakest of them all. It was the least realized. But it has the most potential because they have the largest footprint. They have the greatest back-end service integrations. So, I'm sure it's just phase one of it. But, I agree. I think Shuttleworth did call it, and I think a lot of people now are just trying to figure out how to pull it off. And we're going to see a whole bunch of different takes on a similar idea. We will see. All right, so one last thing regarding Google I/O. Wiggle Waffles wrote in and to the Tech Talk Today subreddit, a great place to give your feedback. And he says, I think this was a huge presentation, referring to Google I/O, and it shows that the massive amount of resources that Google has available to it allowed Google to blow away the open competition who had similar ideas first. Canonical, Yalla, KDE, SteamOS. All the others are going to get crushed under the Google infrastructure behemoth over the next 5 years. Open software will survive as a niche in the margins, but the average consumer, their life will belong to Google. Dun, dun, dun. And he's talking about Android TV, Chrome OS, tablets. What do you think, Ick? Is it cray-cray, or do you think he might have it?
I think Google does want to own all that, definitely.
I mean, they announced that Android One, right? That like a Firefox OS phone competitor, right? That's pretty big.
Yeah, that is huge, because that might actually crush Firefox OS. I hate to say it, but I think that's very possible with their low-end device they've got coming.
I wouldn't go as far as saying that it would crash Firefox OS, but I think competition is good. And actually, before that, Firefox OS didn't really have much of a competition in that cheap phone space. I kind of wonder how it will work out for Android, like whether these will be actually higher spec phones than what we see with Firefox, because Android doesn't run all that well on slow hardware.
Yeah, and there is still a huge difference in emerging markets between a $25 phone and a $100 phone. And $100, is it $100 or is it $110, $120? What is the real price? Because we're pretty sure with that Firefox OS phone is going to be, that cheap one's going to be $25. That's a huge difference.
I'll tell you what I took away from this, the bits that I saw in the news articles, not just the Android one, but also the wearables and all the talk about the cloud that Google were doing in the keynote, was being locked in. It scared me. They were talking something like 1 billion, devices running Android, and it could be more than that. In the future, it could be 2 billion, it could be 3 billion, it could be half of the planet having a dependency on one company for their software, for the most of the stack that they use, and all that data being on one company's servers. I just found that alarming that everyone would buy into that, and that would be fine. Years ago we would have said if Microsoft did this, it would be a big no-no. But because it's Google, that's okay.
Well, Apple's been doing it for years. Apple's been doing that for years, and not only that, but Apple's devices are harder to get out of than Google's devices.
I would argue, though, that the level of scale definitely matters here, because when you're talking about specifically what Popey's talking about, as almost impossible as a concept as it sounds, Popey's literally talking about the lock-in of billions of people to one software platform and provider. Whereas,
right. And when you go for Android One, when they showed that map of emerging markets where there were billions of dots all over India, South America, and Northern Asia and Eastern Asia, that's a truckload of people. And if they've already got a billion, that second and third billion shouldn't be that hard with a cheaper device, because they've already got all the apps, they've got the infrastructure. They're most of the way there. And that's what scares me. And Apple aren't aiming for that. Aren't aiming for the emerging markets. They're not aiming for those other 4
they
want to.
They want to lock in all of the hippies, or I mean not hippie, all of the yuppies that have the money to buy $3 apps every day. That's really who
Right.
Apple wants to lock in. And the other thing it's a broader context too, because you have also the docs aspect, which is it's no longer a file type lock-in like it used to be of the 90s. In the 90s, we were all concerned about proprietary docx and XLS and PPT file formats. Now what we need to be more concerned about is my data exists in this service, in their own container format, in their own data silo. And that's the new type of lock-in. And there's a lot of Google services that come with it that are very, very convenient to use.
They've got some compelling reasons to use their tools. I mean, I use their tools myself. Yeah. And it worries me sometimes when I look at it and I think, really, when I created an email account for my kids in Google, I was thinking, do I really want to set them up with this for for what will likely be the rest of their life? And while I agree Apple do the same thing and they lock you in, and you could argue that Google is easier to get out of, there's the convenience factor that actually you wouldn't want to. The fact that, why would you extract all your documents from Google when they've got this online capability where you can collaboratively edit documents with your friends and co-workers, and you can easily email someone an appointment and it will just show up in their calendar.
Well, and it makes it so easy to switch between computers, which is very nice sometimes.
Right, yeah.
It's an interesting type of lock-in. I don't think it is sustainable from the one vendor, one software platform, all your data in Google. I think if you look at what's happened to really address a specific area of the market, Android gets forked, and they end up running their own stack. I mean, you look at what Amazon's doing. There's also a lot of other phone manufacturers in other parts of the world that are doing this. They don't necessarily have the Western market adoption, but they are their own forks of Android. And these have all kinds of horrible implications, too. Security issues, privacy issues. I mean, they're horrible. But
there aren't that many companies that make successful forks of Android. I mean, there are
that's a good point.
the cheapo knockoffs that aren't official Google approved, and they don't have Google apps. But there's only really Amazon. I can't think of anyone else who's done a successful.
It's commercially that at least in the West what we buy. I suppose so. I guess I'm trying to think of another. There's other things like there's point of sale devices
that use it. They use Android, but they're not forks. Amazon's Fire is a deliberate Fire OS is a deliberate fork of Android.
Right.
There's very few of those, and ones that are part of the Open Handset Alliance get crushed by Google. So
that's
it's only by virtue of them not being in the Open Handset Alliance that Amazon aren't being slapped about by Google.
And that was kind of a point I made during the keynote. I didn't want to push on it too hard because the keynote was actually happening at the time, but they were up on stage, and it really gets me after a little bit because they talk about, right when they're talking about the market adoption and the number of Android devices, and this is an open platform, with the code that's open and community, and now we in the same breath, and now we deliver 80% of our updates through the Google Play API services, and we have all these great new apps that we're updating through Google Play, and I'm thinking, Yeah, but all of that is proprietary. All of that is closed source. And in fact, in a lot of cases, you moved from open source applications like the gallery, like the camera, like the mail app, right? I mean, the list just goes on, like the web, all of it. All of it. They've moved from open source applications that were part of ASOP, and they've switched over to better but closed proprietary applications that they deliver via the Play Store. And in one breath, while they're talking about how open and how they love freedom, and then without recognizing the irony of it, without anybody in the crowd going, what the hell, they immediately then talk about how they're delivering everything that's closed source and proprietary. And it underscores to me that when you look at the way they use the Open Handset Alliance to force people to do things with Android, and you look at the way they went after Samsung, which probably you could argue rightfully so, and then you look at the way they're converting all of their own software stack over to closed source software, I'm not seeing the open aspect here that supposedly makes Android so great. And I think the fundamental problem is the more Google does this, the more they deliver through the Play Store, the more proprietary and closed applications they make, the fundamentally harder it gets to fork your own version of Android and make it an actual viable platform, because so much of it will be missing from ASOP now, because so much of it is delivered by Google directly. And I think that's the real problem. And the worst part is kind of like what you're getting to, Popey, is it's all kind of happening at the same time. So as they're getting this massive market penetration, as they're becoming a monopoly in the new Windows monopoly, at the same time they're making that progress, when they're no longer the underdog, they're closing things off. And I think what I would really like to see, as when Google is in a position of power, when Google is in a position of strength in the market, that would be the real indicator of their true spirit if they would open source the applications now at that point. The fact that they're closing things off more now, I think is disturbing. And reflecting on what you just said, it does make me very concerned. And part of it is awful because it's all being done using Linux.
And it surprises me and alarms me and frustrates me that free software advocates will happily, advocate the use of and attend Google I/O and espouse the virtues of Google and slate Apple because Google is slightly more open than Apple. When you look at the apps you're using on a daily basis, right, you are not a free software advocate. Well, if you're using Android with all those apps, you're not.
To me, it seems like Windows Mobile, BlackBerry, iOS, and Android are all essentially on the same plane in that regard. I think the differences are mostly extremely minor at this point when you come down to the actual practical use. And then when you look at carrier-shipped versions or OEM-shipped versions of these Android devices, the problem, right? I'm talking like from the Nexus standpoint. But it's that bad with the Nexus. When you start talking about like a Samsung Galaxy or the HTC One, this problem gets even worse. It's even worse. In some ways, you really got to wonder why. You make a great point. Like, why is this a fanboy thing? It seems obvious that all these companies essentially are offering the same thing with just a different coating on top now.
You've heard me rant about my LG phone and how it has all this bloatware on it.
Yeah,
and it's not stock Android, and it drives me nuts. And that's why I'm getting rid of it in less than a month.
Yeah,
but they all do it.
Yeah.
There are a few exceptions, and they are differentiating themselves by shipping, fairly stock Android. But all the big ones: Samsung, HTC, LG, Sony. They all ship their devices with their own value add, and they have to. Otherwise, they can't differentiate themselves from every other Android device.
Yeah, just remember how Windows PCs used to have the same problem. They got all crapped up because they had to differentiate. They had to have their own menu and their own software selection. It's the same problem.
Right. And their own wireless network utility that took up the whole I do not want to go back to those days.
And took up like half of your CPU power.
Yeah, and comes with like a trial antivirus subscription.
Yeah, you've got to have McAfee on your PC.
Okay. All right. Well, so thanks for your feedback this week, everybody. It was very Google heavy week. I think like we just purged some of that. Like we just kind of vented from all of like the Google for the last 4 days, but next week...
Yeah, I feel better.
Yeah, good. Now, next week, I don't know exactly what the shooting schedule is going to be for Tech Talk today because I'm going to escape away for a couple of days and go stay in a cabin. Now, I spent many an hour looking for cabins that have internet connectivity. And let me tell you something, people. Chris doesn't like making phone calls. And Chris made phone calls to make sure that these places had connectivity. But I don't know how good, because they're like, well, I can't really promise anything. So I'm not totally sure what my shooting schedule is going to be next week. But if I do have internet service, I will be broadcasting a couple of days from a cabin next week. So just keep tuning in to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. Check out what the recording schedule says there. Check jblive.tv starting 9 a.m., noon Eastern to see if I'm live or not. And also, I'd like to plug the Patreon page, patreon.com/today. We're trying to fund the network. Pretty slow uptake this week. I think we only picked up 3 patrons for the whole week, which is not awesome because I tell you what, we really need the support right now. Big time. We got some big stuff, and really the only way we're going to get through it is by doing some temporary hiring, and we need your support to do that. So please go over to patreon.com/today. That's where you can throw in to help support the network, help support the show. We have some pledge levels there where you can throw in to keep Tech Talk Today going, or if you want to invest in our network and keep us going, there's levels there as well. And I'll be releasing exclusive content for those Patreons eventually. It's been a really crazy couple of weeks now. But as things settle, we'll start getting some exclusive content released there too, and you'll get that if you are a Tech Talk Today patron. Patreon.com/today. Please help support the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. We really do need it, and your support means a lot. And if you could jump in right now before the month, your contribution, your pledge can go towards the month of June if you jump in right now. You got a couple of days left to get in there and have that count towards the end of June. I would appreciate that a lot. Patreon.com/today. Help support Tech Talk Today and the Jupiter Broadcasting Network, because really, why not? Now, I want to lead with an old classic commercial, and I thought, we've been talking a lot about Android, we've been talking about markets and third worlds and things like that, but there's something that really makes the world go round. It's not Android, it's not Google, it's not mobile. No, my friends, it's good old-fashioned gasoline.
I'd like some gasoline, please.
Yes, sir.
Dennis! Dennis Day, you in a Texaco uniform?
My name is Rodney. Fill it up with New Sky, Chief, sir?
But you're Dennis Day.
It can drive down the cost of driving and save you money.
Money?
Yes, sir. New Sky, Chief, does one thing better than any other leading gasoline. It keeps valves like this from getting like this. You see, with fewer harmful deposits on your valves, you can get better mileage, and the chance of expensive repairs is much less.
Oh, well, in that case, I'll try a gallon.
Gee, thanks, Mr. Benny.
Wait a minute. If you're not Dennis Day, how did you know I was Jack Benny?
Who else would buy 1 gallon?